Jana, welcome from Canada.
Yeah, it's I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with Canada, but my province is Saskatchewan and my hometown is Saskatoon. So if you're more familiar with the states, we're straight north of Montana. So I don't know if that helps anyone, but long ways away from you.
Where is that compared to BC? Because I did a stint of snowboarding for a while. I should say skiing, actually. It was my husband that I met who was snowboarding. I attempted, but didn't really do too well in that area. In
So
um,
BC is two provinces over to the west. So we're more central. We're the
right,
prairie province in the middle.
yeah,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
definitely have temperature extremes.
We go from -40 to +30. There's a 70-degree, that's Celsius. I don't know if you do Celsius or
Yeah,
Fahrenheit,
we do
but
Celsius. Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
so you know what I'm talking about. Yeah,
yeah.
today's
And it
lovely.
was freezing. I'll never forget the one day I walked out and my hair actually froze. I
Yeah,
didn't know that was a thing.
it's a thing for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, we're kind of, if you could maybe just sit a little bit closer to the mic,
Okay,
Jana.
there we go. How's that? Is that better?
That's much better. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it was
Okay,
just a
good.
little bit soft. Um, so we're here today, and it's amazing to have you on our fourth trimester panel. And I'm so glad that I came into contact with you and met you because I've learned so much from you, and we've just chatted separately, privately, every now and then back and forth about a number of things feeding related. And we're talking, I've specifically said feeding newborns today because breastfeeding is just such a minefield. Um, it can be a really hard area for mums because there's so much pressure that can be placed on breastfeeding as well.
Yeah.
And I think we like to talk about pro fed, as in fed is best, whatever
Mhm.
works for mom and however things work out. I am a breastfeeding advocate in that I believe that there's so much good that can come from breastfeeding, but I'm fully aware that it's not for everybody. And some people really try, some women really try and honestly beat themselves up so much that it's not worth it if it's not working for them. So it was really important to me in having somebody jump on board onto our fourth trimester panel that shared these views as well. And
Mm.
our conversations and what we discussed, I definitely understood that you were the right person to sit on that panel, that you're so compassionate and you care so much about mums. Um, and you fully understand this. You've helped over, I can't believe it, 30,000 moms today with your partner.
Yeah, yeah. I've been in this program where I work. I started actually when I was 24 years old in a program called Healthy and Home, and
Yeah,
we would visit new families in their home as soon as they got home from from the hospital within 24 hours. So I really found my passion there for helping new moms and supporting breastfeeding, and I'm actually still in the same program 26 years later. So
that's
yeah,
incredible.
yeah.
Yeah,
So I have seen the realities of breastfeeding and how hard it can be for new moms when it doesn't go as planned. It's like a grieving process that goes through. So I certainly want to support all families, whatever their feeding goal is initially, but then for sure, whatever their plan is, helping them to be successful in reaching their goals, because it isn't always easy, that's for sure.
totally. And I've spoken to so many mums who were on the verge of giving up.
Yeah.
And I think without the right guidance and the right support, and understanding that it's a learned behavior, a learned skill, there's a lot of pressure as well, just in terms of this maternal instinct that we should just all have, that we should just all know how to breastfeed, that it should come naturally. That's a bit of a fallacy as well. It's it really is something that your body does naturally, perhaps with
Hmm.
hormonally, but
Yeah.
for you to actually understand the different latches and the different positions and understanding the pain and what is normal and what is not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
And babies have certain instincts and reflexes that help them to breastfeed and get to the breast. There's all of that underlying but it depends on how the birth goes. And sometimes with the moms, that there is a learning curve. There is things that you can learn because there's universal truths about breastfeeding, about how your body makes milk and what kind of latch are we trying, what does a deep latch even mean, first of all, like
Mm.
what's our goal, and how do we prevent some of the problems in those early days that new moms have, such as sore nipples and not enough milk. A lot of it is just not quite understanding the process of how your body reacts to the baby being at the breast and how many times to feed. So there is definitely learning that can happen.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to the different topics that we've spoken about that we're going to cover off today. And like I mentioned, if anyone's watching this and you've got questions, whether you're a first time expecting mum and you're wanting to learn more about breastfeeding, or if you're a new mum, um, or even second time mums, I think we've spoken about this too, Jana, that second time feeding can be different to first time. In your head, you might think that you've done it before and you've gone through, or potentially it didn't go so successfully for you first time that it won't work second time round. So we're going to chat a little bit about that as well. So I thought, just to start off, providing like a little bit of an introduction, as to you've kind of mentioned, your passion and how you got into this world of
Mhm.
breastfeeding. But maybe if you can just tell us, you are an internationally breastfeeding certified consultant, which is fantastic, because it means that globally you can provide your knowledge, and you've gone through training to be able to do so as well. And you've dealt with, um, just in terms of being a lactation consultant, I think this was something that I learned about that I didn't even know about your profession until I had bubs. And it was until I entered that breastfeeding world and going, oh, okay, is there actually more than, your midwife? It's like the next layer up, like actually someone who is there to specifically help me with this feeding journey. And you train for years. I had no idea.
The process. I was a registered nurse first,
Yeah.
so that helps because you need health science education credits in order to start the process. But then you do need like 95 hours of education and 500 hours of hands-on work, and that might have even upped a little bit in the last little bit. But you do write an international exam every 5 years. So I did study for almost a year before I wrote the first time, but now I've written a few times since, and it gets easier as you get older and have more experience for the exams. But yeah, it is quite, it's a lot of knowledge and a lot of studying and a lot of experience to become a lactation consultant. But I
Yeah.
don't regret it. Yeah, I
Yeah,
found
no,
my,
it's incredible. We're so fortunate, I think, to have you guys. But that was part of my journey in Wild Mama, was just working out all these different amazing professions and these incredible people that exist there out there to help new mums that we just actually don't know about until we in the struggling phase. And it was more just like, how can we bring that knowledge up beforehand? Because often you can feel like there's a lot of lead up to the birth. And then if you don't have the support or the know-how of who can actually help you, it's almost like falling off a cliff without a parachute. I
yeah,
always feel like it's like, bam, oh, okay, I've got to do XYZ and I have no idea who to talk to, what to do. It's a completely like overwhelming world and you're sleep deprived. So having this knowledge up front is, I believe, so valuable.
yeah.
Um,
I've been in many, many living rooms over the years, and I started to notice a pattern after I'd worked a little while, and the families that had prepared for breastfeeding and newborn care ahead of time had a whole different postpartum experience than those that didn't. And I think a lot of the focus in pregnancy is on the labor and delivery, which is great. That's important information, but we can't forget what happens after the baby's actually placed in your arms. And it's like kind of go time, and you go home from the hospital feeling like, oh my gosh. And I didn't want that to happen to any more families. And so that was my whole passion for starting the online, and now the New Mom Collective is supporting parents in pregnancy and narrowing it down to that whole world of Google that is so overwhelming,
yeah.
just down to what are the core basics that you need to know to get through those early weeks, so that you can feel confident and calm rather than overwhelmed and stressed and Googling at 3 in the morning.
Completely. I'm so
Yeah.
glad you mentioned that, because I always say to everybody I talk to who's becoming a parent, I'm like, avoid Dr. Google at 3 a.m. in the morning. I even say 3 a.m. in the morning. I'm just like, that is the scariest place to go, because
Yeah.
you're so tired and you're looking for that support, you're looking for that help, but you'll read one article and then you'll read the next article, and that would have contradicted what you've just read. And it just becomes even more overwhelming and a lot more stressful than it's than the need is out there for it. So knowing the right resources and the right people that you can trust and share the same values as you, I think, is what's the most important. Because there's so much information out there that there's no shortage of information, but it's drilling down to what's important to you, the people that you trust, and just one or two key nuggets of information that you can take on board that and implement that will actually make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Ideally, with our courses, we have well, we have a few different courses. Simply Breastfeeding is all about preparing for breastfeeding. But then we have prenatal power prep as well, which is breastfeeding plus all the newborn information. So all the questions I get when I'm coming to their home the morning after they've been home from the hospital, and there's a scroll of questions. We tried to answer all those questions in our courses so that parents know that information and don't have to even write it down because they know it ahead of time. And then once baby comes, you have a reference point to refer to. It's like, because you can't learn it all. And sometimes it's like, oh yeah, I learned something about that. And they can go back to the course and look it up and figure out, what's happening. Because there's a lot of unknowns in those early weeks. Things change so quickly. Even the color of the baby poop changes from black to green to brown to yellow. It's like all of these changes. It's just so overwhelming if you're not knowing what to expect. So
yeah. I remember Googling green poop and being like, tell me about it. But I started freaking out myself a lot more, and I was like, no, stop. I can't Google anymore. I need to talk to somebody and I need to understand what's going on. Yeah, so I'm going to jump into our questions over here. So I'm just going to probably tilt my head up and look on the screen, just jumping into them. And then if anyone's got any questions, feel free to start jotting down in the comments right now, and I will, we'll get to those as well. Unfortunately, technology has not been on my side today. So now it's just opening up the questions. But maybe if you can start just by talking about, you started mentioning around the fact that you're a lactation consultant. Could you define exactly what a lactation consultant does? We've mentioned that you study for a really long time, but can you probably define what's the key difference between midwife, lactation consultant, and when would somebody call upon you?
So we specialize in obviously everything breastfeeding related. As far as education wise, I used a lot of my lactation consultant knowledge in order to create our courses as far as the anatomy and physiology and how does this actually work, this breastfeeding, and how does your body know to make milk and all of that. In my job, though, day to day, I am problem solving. We're working with babies that maybe didn't get off to the start, maybe they're not gaining weight, moms with sore nipples, all the problems. In our breastfeeding center, we see every age of baby breastfeeding. So we can see babies, even toddlers. Sometimes it's weaning we're talking about, but it's really getting specific with, where, first of all, what are the families, what is their goal and where are they at and what problems are they having? And then not making a plan for them, but making a plan with them and giving them options so they can decide, how they're going to navigate these problems to figure out how to make this better. So it is a lot of research. It's a lot of problem solving, but giving them evidence-based information to help make their decisions when they're thinking about options, and really working at coming up with a plan that's realistic. Like I could come up with a plan to increase a mom's milk supply that's like, okay, you got to feed 12 times a day and pump after every feed. And we're, and it has to be sustainable, because if it's a plan that's not sustainable, then it just doesn't work. And then moms feel bad about the whole process. So it's finding that middle ground of what is the problem and what are some options? And then how are we going to support this mom? And at the same time, making sure that the baby's gaining and all of those things. So it is dealing with supplementation and weighing babies and measuring, but a lot of conversations around what options the moms want to do.
Yeah. And when do you normally come on board in comparison to a midwife? Is it, for me, I was referred to a lactation consultant through my midwife, and that's how I came to learn about lactation consultants. And I guess I was struggling as well.
Yeah.
Do you work hand in hand with midwives quite often like that, or?
The midwives in our city do refer to our breastfeeding center if there's problems that they need a little bit of extra help with. Sometimes there's underlying tongue ties and all sorts of other things that can complicate things that are more of a higher level, even latch position, those kinds of things. Just having another person have a point of view and another person to look at things can be really helpful. In our clinic, though, moms can self-refer, so they don't even need referrals, but it's a matter of, I think, if you're expecting right now, it's finding out what supports are available in your area and actually getting the phone number of that clinic in your phone and figuring out who is available, because when you're in the middle of struggling or you're exhausted and overwhelmed, that's not the time to be Googling, is there a lactation consultant in my area. So I think in pregnancy, the first thing is to find out your contacts information, and then if you do struggle or need help, you'll be able to make an appointment and see someone.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I love that you mentioned working with families as well, and spoke about weaning and the breastfeeding being sustainable as well, because breastfeeding is just such a controversial topic that even if you are breastfeeding, you feel this pressure in terms of how long do you breastfeed for, and when you stop breastfeeding, there's a lot of pressure as well, and a lot of guilt that goes with that too. So I just like the fact that you mentioned that you can even deal with lactation consultants sort of when you're coming towards the end of your journey as well, or you're trying to figure out, how do I tone this down a bit as well.
Oh, for sure. There's not just one way to feed a baby, and there's not just one plan. And I think my message to moms is always like, the definition of a good mom isn't how you feed your baby. Obviously, we're all good moms. We're all doing our best. But my passion is helping women reach their goals, because I have seen the grieving that happens when it doesn't go as planned. And sometimes it's things like they got bad advice, they didn't get the support they needed. So things that got in the way of them reaching their goals. And that's why I think prenatal education is so important, because learning some of that ahead of time makes it you can prevent so many problems just by learning ahead of time what you need to know. But if a mom chooses not to breastfeed, of course we support her and love her and give her all the same support as someone who's breastfeeding. It's just a matter of being a breastfeeding, I'm a breastfeeding advocate. I believe in breast milk, but I also believe in supporting families wherever they're at. And we don't know the reason why she may not want to breastfeed, and it's really none of our business. I think for me, it's that conversation and supporting her wherever she's at.
Fully. But I was also referring to kind of when you're coming to the end of your journey as well, and which is just as hard as it can be, just as hard as the beginning.
It can, and it can be emotional. There's hormonal things going on.
Totally.
There's the end of a relationship where right? And sometimes the babies, and that's where it is a relationship. Sometimes the moms want to quit before the babies want to quit before the mom. So it's figuring out what is the best way. And anytime we talk about weaning, I always, talk about doing it as gradual as possible, just to allow the baby to adjust and to allow the breasts and the milk production to adjust to in the best way. That's not always possible. Some women have to abruptly wean, but for the most part, a slower weaning is often better for everybody.
Yeah, totally. So we've spoken about mainly, definitely pro feed is best. But what would you define as success? I guess this is a tricky one, because it's really a personal thing. I think you need to be confident with what you choose at the end of the day, and you have to draw that line in the sand and kind of going, this is what success is to me. But how would you define breastfeeding success in terms of what should a mom be feeling, what feels right when you are breastfeeding, or you've come to that? How do you can you define it?
I don't think you can define it. I think it's individual. I think it's like you said, it's if the mom reached her goal, whatever that goal was, if she felt like she reached her goal and had the support she needed to whatever her breastfeeding journey is like, then that's success. It can look many different ways. The definition of success is a baby that's thriving and gaining,
Mm.
and a plan that's working for everybody, that the mom's happy and she's able to cope with it. She's got enough supports and in place. So to me, that's success. And I think it looks different for every person depending on how much support they have or what their goals are in the start. So yeah,
Yeah.
I would never want to set up a definition of success
Yeah.
for feeding,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. No, I think the key thing that you mentioned there is actually just in terms of baby thriving, and regardless of how baby is being fed, as long as baby's thriving and mum is feeling good in terms of her decision making, where she's got to, that's success. And like you said, it's individual, which
It
is
is. And
a really key take home, I think, for so many women because of that pressure, just in terms of around like the success to breastfeed, and they feel like they've got to make it work. It comes down into what feels right for you and what's working for you.
right. And finding the supports you need to make it work for you. Sometimes it's just
Yeah.
because they don't have access to someone that maybe a tongue tie is missed or maybe whatever, right? There can be so many underlying things. Maybe she thinks breastfeeding is supposed to hurt and doesn't get help and could have had help with the latching. So it's all about making use of what supports you have in order to reach your goals, is important too, for sure.
Yeah. I think you just mentioned there as well, just in terms of latching and potentially there's the pain that comes with breastfeeding and defining what's probably normal. I never like to really use the word normal because normal is different for everybody. But just could you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because often, and I'm not the only mum, I've had this said to me when I was breastfeeding Harry and starting off my journey. But then I've also spoken with new mums in different workshops that have actually mentioned the exact same phrase. And I'm going, yep, this is one critical phrase that comes through and can be so misinterpreted. There's an element of pain that comes with breastfeeding when you start breastfeeding because it is the first time you're doing it. Your body hasn't done it before. But then when you hear the phrase, if it hurts, you're doing it wrong, I think that can be really hard on new mums, particularly because you're trying to do everything right. And there's this element of feeling like there should be this maternal instinct that should go with you, that naturally things should just fall into place, but they don't necessarily. So what's the sort of, can you kind of define the element of pain that is normal?
Yeah, well, I often say it can be tender in the beginning, especially when you're first starting, where you kind of, at the beginning, kind of curl your toes a bit and go, woo, but it should kind of ease off once the baby gets sucking. And I think if you're curling your toes the whole time, or I've seen mums with their shoulders up to their ears, or they start dreading feeds, or there's nipple damage where the nipples are actually cracked or bleeding or scabbed, that to me is too much pain. And that would be an indication to get help, get the latch assessed. I've seen lots of families, sometimes it's just a quick little adjustment in the latch, just the angle, like getting that chin further away, just a little different position, and the mom goes, oh my gosh, that's so much better. So I think anytime that is that to that extent that you're actually curling your toes or dreading feeds, or that, it's time to reach out and get some help, and get some help early. So I've had moms that have waited months thinking, breastfeeding's supposed to hurt, so I'm just going to hang in there and keep doing it. But with help, you can really prevent a lot of problems, and you can also get going on a pain-free journey quicker. If you can figure out, there's always a root cause. If there's pain, it shouldn't be painful. It can be tender, but not painful. If the nipples are looking squished after feeds, like a pancake, or slanted like a brand new lipstick tube, that means there's pressure being it means there's pressure on the nipple, and that actually isn't normal. The nipple should be way back in the baby's mouth. So if there's pain, that usually means that either the latch isn't, the baby doesn't have enough breast tissue in their mouth is one thing, or it could be the angle that the baby's on, or something underlying like a tongue tie or something. So no matter how the mom works on the latching, if she still has pain, it is good to look for something underlying as well. So yeah.
What would your best tips be for going into the breastfeeding journey if you haven't breastfed before, or even actually we spoke about second time mums, because I also discovered becoming a second time mum, in my head, I thought, okay, well, I've done this before. I went through X amount of pain. With Harry, actually, I think I definitely sought help too late. He pretty much gouged out the Grand Canyon.
Oh dear. Yeah. Oh dear.
Yeah, and we had a long journey to kind of get us on track, and to get through that. But second time, I kind of thought eventually, I've got this, I've done it, it shouldn't be like that again. And I went through pretty much a start of the tenderness and the pain as well. And I did discover that it was quite different because I could distinguish what you're talking about, that curling of your toes, kind of going, okay, this is not how it should be.
Right.
So what would you say in terms of tips for breastfeeding, and probably if you, as well as looking at if you're a second time mom going into that as well, versus a new first time mom?
Yeah, I think would have a couple of tips. The first tips would be, as we talked about, prepare ahead of time, like find out as much as you can about breastfeeding, about what does a good latch mean, how do I know my baby's getting enough milk, all of that. And sometimes if your first experience didn't go as planned, having that knowledge the second time can be a whole different ball game. And sometimes babies are just different too, different deliveries, different all sorts of things. But my first tip would be to learn about it ahead of time, try not to do it after. And the second thing would be find your supports while you're still pregnant. So that would be finding your support as far as other mom groups, some other moms to talk to, like your community. If you have that village behind you, you can ask questions, and it helps you to determine, is this normal, or is this more pain than what 80% of the group has had? Then maybe I should go see to someone. So having that support and having someone that actually gets it and has been through that same journey can sometimes be really helpful. And also, though, finding the support for household tasks, all the things in those early weeks that can really take your time away from just practicing breastfeeding, resting. And we don't want partners and support people doing all those tasks. So thinking, and with COVID, it's harder, right, to figure out how supports you can get. Sometimes you have to be creative, but maybe it's actually finding out who that person is in pregnancy and writing specific things down. It might be someone coming to walk your dog every day, right? Just to take the edge off the dog's excitement. It might be someone getting your groceries and dropping them on your step. There's lots of things that people can do. If it's someone that can actually be in your home, have them do the cleaning and the laundry and all of that, just to make it those early weeks, easier to deal with. I think it's very overwhelming for new families in that early time. And
Particularly when you've got so much going on, and then you're trying to navigate. I mean, it is a new world in itself, becoming a mum, and then breastfeeding as well on top of it. It's a lot.
It's a lot. And those babies, those little newborns feed a lot, sometimes 10, 12 times in 24 hours in the early. So if all you have to worry about is resting, feeding the baby, feeding yourself, hopefully getting a shower and maybe changing into a new pair of yoga pants, like basic stuff, right? Then if someone else can deal with everything else, or look after your toddler so you can have a nap or whatever, that can really make breastfeeding go the direction you want it to, just having that time and that rest.
And right now as well, I mean, you mentioned COVID, and you recently were on the news, your local news as well, which is a great watch. So please share the link on this page as well, or I can share it if you share it with me again. I'm sure I've got it somewhere. But I loved how you had some of your mums in the interview as well, just talking about how COVID's affected them, because we're actually really fortunate in New Zealand that we sort of feel like life is normal, in the sense that we don't have that many COVID restrictions, barely any, and we're walking around as if things are normal. But we have so many of our members in our community who've been so impacted by not having the support, I suppose, that they were expecting or would have expected to have had COVID not been around or a thing. So many of our family members are overseas and in different parts of the country, that makes it, different parts of the world, that makes it really hard for us to seek that support. So I think, like you said, it's just, having the community that you can rely on, and talking to your neighbor and talking to your friends and being more open with them in terms of, look, I really need help to do XYZ, or could you could you help? Because it can be so hard to ask for help as well.
For sure. For sure. And when we launched our community in August, I thought, oh my gosh, is this even possible in the online world for women to have connections and build friendships? Because I
Mm.
was so used to our in-person classes. And it has been so heartwarming to watch. The moms are cheering each other on, they're supporting each other, they're asking questions and having babies at different ages in the community. They've been able to kind of, okay, now I'm getting ready to the solid stage. And there's a mom that just has been through the solid stage. So they have someone to ask questions to. And I don't know, it's really heartwarming. I think that I was pleasantly surprised how much support women can get in the online world. So I think for now that might be our new norm a little bit. It's nice if you can get whatever whoever's there in person, but it doesn't mean that you can't find connections and support online. So
There's so many awesome groups out there where mums can actually look for the specific help they need. But I think it's great having that smaller knit group where you develop those really close relationships with. Yeah, so
sure.
so definitely encourage moms to seek the help. Now, we were talking about preparing for breastfeeding as well, and one of the mums that spoke to me in my coffee group, she told me that her parents had suggested that she rub her nipples to prepare for breastfeeding to toughen them up. Can you tell us, is that a real thing? Does that work or not? And in terms of, I guess, physically, we've spoken mainly around arming yourself with knowledge. Is there anything that we can physically do to prepare for breastfeeding? Or, and then probably once we're breastfeeding, what can we do to help with the sore nipples?
Yeah, I've definitely had mums ask me that as well. And thankfully, it's an old wives' tale. So if someone tells you to,
I just
don't
thought I'm not going to do that regardless. So that was something I stayed away from.
or like a rough towel, but no, the research supports that it actually causes more damage than it does good. So that's
Wow.
good favor. So I wouldn't do any of that. Physically, your body is smart. Baby, you think about it in pregnancy, your body knows exactly what to do to feed that baby. And actually in pregnancy, it starts making the very first milk called colostrum around the 24th week of pregnancy. So everything is happening in the background without you having to do anything about it, which is really kind of cool. Even, the brown part around the nipple, the areola, it darkens in pregnancy.
Mm.
And research would tell you that that's so the babies have a little target to work their way towards because their eyesight is, a little bit blurry. And so it gives them
Wow.
something to go towards. So things like that just reassure me. And I think, you know what, that our bodies are smart. They know we've done this, right? It's
Mm.
part of evolution that our bodies know how to make milk. And so physically, no, but yes, that's where the education comes in, because getting the knowledge and all of that is what's really going to help. And being around breastfeeding moms, just see what breastfeeding looks like. Then that's where, if you watch an older baby breastfeed, you see how easy it really is. Really, they just help themselves and they do it upside down and all, right? So that really is encouraging to the moms in the early weeks when they're struggling, to know that this isn't what it's going to be like the whole breastfeeding experience. And moms that have breastfed an older baby know that it's not just nutrition, it's comfort and preventing temper tantrums, helping with
Yeah.
skin knees, right? Like it's a comfort for them as they're older. So,
Yeah.
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 So
No.
physically, no. Yeah.
Okay. Good to know.
Don't do the
Leave them as they are, because that's the last time you'll ever see them that way.
Yeah.
When it comes to actually breastfeeding, and for our, I guess, particularly for our expecting moms right now, what are the sort of things that they can plan for postpartum wise in terms of add to their toolkit around heading into this journey? Are there any products that you would suggest they buy? And I've heard things about cabbage leaves as well. Could you elaborate on anything there?
Yeah, there actually is research supporting cabbage leaves, and it's because there's an enzyme in cabbage that helps with swelling. So when the breasts are overly full and kind of engorged, if you have a green cabbage in your fridge, you just peel off one of the leaves and kind of break the vein of it, the cabbage down the middle, and put it on the inside of your bra, which sounds really odd, but women have sworn by it, and it does help to take away some of that swelling. Now, you wouldn't want to wear it's temporary. You wouldn't want to have cabbage in your bras all the time. I
Yeah,
think
and you wouldn't have
I'm
to freeze the cabbage, right? You can just put it in the fridge.
in the fridge, and I think the cooling of having it in the fridge helps with swelling, obviously too. But
Yeah,
there is actually an enzyme in cabbage that helps with that.
right.
So other than cabbage, other products, we have surveyed actually our moms just to get this information. So I
Yeah,
have it. I'll share it with you.
definitely.
Um,
That'd be great. Thank you.
the top must-haves that they said is a water bottle because you're going to be really thirsty
Yes.
when you're breastfeeding. A couple of
Everywhere.
napkins
I'm always like, carry one in the nappy bag, one by your bedside table, one in your car, just
everywhere
everywhere.
you have water.
Yeah.
Yeah. They suggested nursing bras if possible. They are a little bit more expensive, so it's a bit of an investment but
Mhm.
for the amount of times you feed, having the convenience of just being able to undo the flap rather than having to take your bra off, they felt that that was worth it. Breast pads, now you may not want to buy them ahead of time though, because not everyone leaks milk, but having breast pads was important. And they said
And there's
nipple
some
cream.
handy reusable ones as well, because trying to think sustainably, there's some awesome reusable ones these days that you can literally just throw in the wash and come out and
For
keep
sure.
reusing. So you're not having to peel open and you're not, yeah, shedding a whole
Yeah,
lot of plastic. Yeah.
for sure. They said nipple creams as well, and I have noticed that moms do like nipple creams in general because I think it has a soothing effect to put on a lotion or cream. It feels like you're doing something. And the research would say though that as far as tissue healing of sore nipples, if they are scabbed or cracked, breast milk actually comes out on top as far as
Wow.
speeding up the healing of the tissue. So, I mean, you can use a cream if you want, but I would suggest if you can get a little extra drop of milk and rub that on the nipple first, you'll probably help the healing along even more than the cream. Now, having said that, I've had women that, like you say, when you had gouges on your nipples, that's a
Mm.
whole nother level. And sometimes a medicated cream, we call it all-purpose nipple ointment in Canada. I don't know if you have something similar, but it's something that has different ingredients in it that the pharmacist mixes, and it really helps to, just in case there's underlying little bit of bacteria or fungal or something going on, it
Mm.
really hits it good. So sometimes prescription medications like that are good if you have a lot of damage. Um, they considered nice to haves would be nursing tops or shirts, and they put it as a nice to have because some of the moms thought that they were a bit expensive.
Yeah.
Other moms have said just layering works, like wearing a tank top and then another one over top. You can kind of nurse
Yeah.
more discreetly without needing the nursing shirts. I don't know the if you have pumps, it's called a haka pump,
Oh, yes.
haka pump.
Yes.
I think that's, yeah, a lot
Yeah.
of moms like that. It kind of
Selection.
passively corrects the drip milk as you go.
Yeah.
That was on their nice to have list. And some moms like a pump.
Hmm.
Depending though, like when you go back to work, I've had moms that don't even use a pump the whole breastfeeding time. They just hand express. So, and that's free and easy, but that's an option for you. Some moms do have to pump if their milk supply is low or whatever, and that's a whole other thing. But in the not needed category, they put nursing cover, which I don't know what it's like in where you're from in New Zealand, but in Canada, I think we're pretty good at breastfeeding in public and not feeling like we have to wear those
Yeah, I
big
think we're pretty good here too. I think it's very much a personal thing and it can be quite daunting, particularly when you become a first time mum. And it's this new sort of feeling of being out and vulnerable in public and all of a sudden being like, what? I'm like putting my boobs out. And it can feel almost a little bit awkward when you're starting
yeah.
before you feel comfortable about it as well. And it can be around the people that you're with, you might feel that someone sitting across from you doesn't feel so comfortable with it. Going into the
There's
winter months, I actually I've heard ponchos are really good as well because they provide enough air and you can kind of have baby underneath. But yeah, nursing garments, it's definitely a personal preference, like you say.
and it's easier to be discreet when the babies are older. When they're
Mm,
when you're in little newborns, you feel like you have to have hand here and hand there. It's harder to be discreet with
yeah,
everything.
yeah.
Certainly as they're older, I've seen lots of babies just help themselves and no one even knows. But if it's you're going out to breastfeed in public, I would say like go with a couple nursing, like a couple mom friends that
Yeah,
give you
yeah.
some
Work of your confidence that way where you're all doing it together. Yep, safety in numbers.
yeah. The other thing that some moms said wasn't needed was an actual nursing pillow, which I found interesting. They just use pillows off the bed to save money. But
Mm,
I found that the My Breast Friend pillow, it's called My Breast Friend,
okay.
is a really popular one. And a lot of moms like that too. So I think, again, that's personal preference depending on how much money you have to spend, first of all. And then keeping
Yeah.
in mind with the pillow that you buy, not everyone's shape is the same. Some people are
Mm.
tall waisted, and so it's kind of personal for that. But yeah, that's what the moms came up with. So I always depend on them for information. I learn every day from
Yeah,
the
one of
new mom.
the things that I recommend is mattress protectors and pillow protectors for your own bed. because
Oh
often we
yeah.
think about baby for bassinet or cot, to make sure that we've got the mattress protectors. But I often found when I was in my own bed, if you are leaking, it's nice to be able to just whip off the sheet, and potentially it touches the pillow, and then you just whip off the pillowcase. It's not actually touching your pillow. So that's one of the things that I'd add to the list.
I live.
Something else that that a few mums have recommended, and I also swear by them, are hydrogel breast pads. Um, I'm not sure if you've got them in Canada, which are quite cooling. You put them in the fridge.
Yeah, I've heard of those, and mums use those as well, for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's so many different things that can at least help with that. What's your view on nipple shields, and when would you feel that they should be used or introduced, and what are the pros and cons of that?
Yeah, in my opinion, a nipple shield should really only be used when you're working with a lactation consultant.
Yeah.
It is a barrier that goes between the breast and the baby, so it can affect
Mm,
milk supply, but it also has saved breastfeeding in other situations because if
mm,
the baby's not latching, it's been the way to get the baby to the breast, and then eventually we can get the shield off with time. But so I definitely don't think that's something you need to purchase ahead of time.
yeah.
Especially if you live like in our city, we can be at a drugstore in 3 minutes and get it when you need it.
Get when you
And
need
they
it.
come
Yeah.
in different sizes, so it's complicated and a bit confusing for new parents. And but use with discretion and only if there's problems, like if you have a really baby born really early, or if the baby's not latching because
Mm,
your nipples are maybe inverted, then it can help with breastfeeding. But really only once your more mature milk is in and there's a milk flowing. We wouldn't want to use a nipple shield in the early days of breastfeeding. So
yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
No, thanks for clarifying.
Mhm.
We spoke. You mentioned pumping as well, and some mums will choose to pump, and um, that can be quite helpful for some mums as well, and particularly if they are trying to increase feeds as well. When it comes to pumping, is there a science behind pumping? When is the best time to pump? It can be quite daunting when you go out and you buy this product and then feel like you're sitting on the couch and milking yourself.
Yeah.
So what would your recommendations be around, from the purchasing stage, how to decide what to purchase and what will fit for you, um, versus actually when it comes down to pumping, when's the best time to do it so that it doesn't necessarily influence babies' feeds?
Yeah. I did a whole Facebook Live on this topic, so I'll
Oh,
send you the link
amazing.
because could talk for an hour about that
Yeah,
topic. But
I'm sure
um,
we're getting such, we're sort of skimming the top of everything, I think, with this
yeah,
discussion, which
that's
is nice. Yeah.
a general rule, though, is I recommend waiting 4 to 6 weeks if you can after your baby's born, because in the early weeks, your body's really trying to figure out how much milk to make. And if you do lots of pumping, plus the baby's feeding effectively and
Mm,
doing well, you'll end up with a really large milk supply, which sounds good in theory, but
mm,
it can cause problems because then the babies, it's like a fire hose of milk coming at them sometimes, and they can cough and sputter, and they get extra
right.
air, they're gassy. So pumping after that, of course, it doesn't interfere with your supply as much. So if you want to have a date night or have some milk in the fridge, a lot of moms find after one of the morning feeds, you could get more milk than in the evening. So, feed the baby first and then try to pump after is often what the moms do to try to slowly get a little stash of milk. But having said that, we do initiate pumping earlier if there's problems. So if the babies aren't latching, the breast needs stimulation so that your body knows to keep making milk if the baby's not there. So if the
Mm,
mom and the baby are separated, say the baby goes to NICU, or if the baby's not latching, we would first start hand expressing in those early hours just to get the drops of colostrum to give to the baby, even on a little teaspoon. But if the baby continues not to latch, you would want to start with a good hospital grade electric pump to stimulate your supply and get things going. So what kind of pump you need to buy is so variable depending on
mm,
what's happening. If you know you have to go back to work, and soon, some of the moms that are in our motherhood inner circle had to go back at 6 weeks.
mm,
So they had invested in a good electric pump because they knew they needed to pump in order to, because they're going to be separated from their baby. So I don't know, same thing. I don't usually say to buy your pump in pregnancy until you know what you're going to need, but learn how to hand express because that'll get you through those early hours if your baby doesn't latch. And then you can kind of figure out what pump to buy if you need a pump after that.
Yeah.
But there's so many pumps out there. It's very confusing.
Is there a better time to pump, like morning or evening? Or
Moms tell me they get more milk in the morning. I think in the evening is often when the babies they're doing more cluster feeding, so the
yeah,
milk supply is maybe not as great as first thing in the morning, but it is individual. Like it's a trial and error thing a little bit too.
right. So it's not one size fits all. It's not like express in the morning. It's a personal thing. And is it just
So
getting to know your
I
body?
majority say the morning though is when they have the most milk and have the most success with pumping. Yeah.
Yeah. And you would pump after you've done a feed first?
Yeah. Usually right after the baby's fed if you're wanting to get a little bit of extra milk
Yeah.
put away. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some moms choose to pump and bottle, but there's lots of different options, of course. But yeah.
No, that's great. Um, and then you mentioned as well, if in the early days, you mentioned hand expressing. Um, I guess this is probably something that you would learn quite early on as you have baby. You wouldn't recommend you do it while you're pregnant, correct?
Well, in Canada, women can have that conversation with their healthcare provider and actually start hand expressing some colostrum after the 36th week of pregnancy.
Yeah.
If their healthcare provider agrees, there's just a very few situations where you might not want to do that, and usually it's that conversation with your healthcare provider will identify those issues if you have had premature labor or things in the past. But for the majority of women after the 36 week, um, you can go ahead, start collecting drops. It's not ounces or gallons of milk, it's literally drops. And I refer to a website called moremilksooner.com, and it's a lactation consultant that specializes, has great information on, it's called the antenatal collection of colostrum. And women actually freeze their colostrum, take it to the hospital with them. And then if there is a medical reason why their baby needs more milk, say the blood sugars are low, or they aren't having enough wet and dirty diapers or whatever, then you actually have your own milk to give the baby rather than having to use formula. So have you
Yeah,
heard of that?
that's really helpful because I mean it just means mums to have those conversations with their LMC is what we call them here in New Zealand, lead maternity carer, be it your gynae or your obstetrician or midwife, just having those conversations up front because I think you talk about the birth plan at that 30, 35, 36 week mark as well, which is something that you can at least bring up in that conversation whether you feel it's necessary or whether it's something that you're interested in learning about
Yeah.
to make a plan. Yeah.
And even learning the technique of hand expression while you're still pregnant is helpful, because then if the baby all of a sudden isn't latching, you don't have to learn a new skill. You might have been up all night having this little baby and you're tired and overwhelmed. And that's just one more thing you have to learn. So learning it ahead of time, even practicing, is good too if that's something that's okay.
Totally.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, and you mentioned the colostrum, and you mentioned, was it 24 weeks when your body starts to produce colostrum already?
Yeah, so some women will notice like a yellow crusting on their bra, or notice a little drop, and if you don't notice that, it's totally fine too. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be making milk for your baby.
Yeah.
But yeah, your body starts making it early, so it's really, our bodies are really amazing that happens and starts so early. And I get asked, well, if you do that collection of colostrum, you use it all up and there won't be enough for the baby? But no, your body still continues to make it, and then it's a progression of the more mature milk that starts coming after the baby's born. So usually around that day 2, day 3 is when the more mature milk comes, when the moms start feeling their breasts get heavier and start to hear more swallows at the breast. But the early feeds are that colostrum, which is full of antibodies and nutrients. It's really good for babies.
Hmm. Just on that milk, so you're talking about mature milk, can you kind of define the difference between colostrum moving into mature milk? And I've spoken to a number of women whose milk came in really, really late. And that's one of the things that they were really concerned about with breastfeeding. Is there sort of normal range? And kind of how long out is it that your mature milk can come in if you are one of those women when it comes in later? When should you
Yeah,
start to worry?
well, that's where I think you can rely on your healthcare provider to help
Mm.
you through that, because we keep a very close eye on the baby's wet and dirty diapers, the baby's weight, the jaundice. It's all making sure that the baby is getting what they need. And when we talk about medical reasons to introduce something other than your breast milk, it's a lot of times something with the baby that's telling us they need more milk. So anytime we have to give extra milk, it would be breast milk as the first choice. So maybe she can express or get extra that way. We don't have great access to milk banks in our city. They're the closest one is like 6.5 hours away. So we don't really have the option of that. But so then formula is the next step. But your milk can come in at any. I had a mom once that it came in at like 8 weeks after her baby first. That's the longest. It's just this weird, strange thing. Sometimes if there's a little piece of the placenta left behind, your body still thinks it's pregnant, so it can be delayed. And then you pass that little piece of tissue.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And so there's lots of factors.
Yeah, because I had spoken to a few mums, and one mum in particular was like, it was weeks. When we sort of understand there's this range of, hopefully we have this expectation that it's going to come around the 3-4 day mark. But then to hear weeks.
Typically it is, about 48 hours after birth, in that range, where you should start feeling some differences in the breast, where they're feeling a little bit heavier. That anything that takes weeks, there's usually something else going on that's not necessarily what we would expect.
So seek help as soon as you can.
Sure. Yeah, that's right. That's my message today. Seek help.
Definitely.
Learn ahead of time. Learn in pregnancy. Seek help early after.
And we would, if you could kind of define what is the difference between colostrum and mature milk, and probably what there's also expecting, or new mums might not have heard of, fore milk and hind milk. Could you kind of talk to that as well?
So colostrum is more like a yellowy orangey color, and it's, like I said, just drops, like it's very small amounts, but it's packed full of antibodies. It's good for the baby's health. As the more mature milk comes in, it doesn't actually, if you were to express it and put it in a container, it doesn't look like cow's milk does. It looks more watery, and that's normal. That's what breast milk looks like. So when we talk about the more mature milk coming in, you can tell often by the color of it, but also by the volume of it, because you'll get more and more milk over time. So the amount of milk increases as well as the color of the milk. When we talk about fore milk and hind milk, that can really confuse parents, because it just makes it too technical and too hard, because really it's all good milk. What fore milk and hind milk refers to is the amount of fat in the milk. So science and research would support that the milk at the beginning of the feed is higher in sugars, and as the baby feeds, the milk towards the end of the feed is higher in fat, higher in calories. So that part is true. But what isn't true is that at like 7 minutes or 8 minutes, it changes from the fore milk to the hind milk. It's not like that at all. It's a gradual kind of process. So if you think about it, one way is if you went to get some hot water from the tap, and initially it's cold and you have your hand under there waiting for it to warm up, and eventually it gets hot, right? So that would be—
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, so the hot milk, or the hot water, would be the higher fat milk. The cold water is the— so then if you came back to that tap though, a couple minutes later, and turned it on, it's still going to be warm, right? I don't know if it'd be still hot, but so if the baby's cluster feeding going back to the breast, they are getting that high calorie milk. So in general, I tell women, don't worry about fore milk and hind milk. There is a few specific situations where we worry about it and actually have to have that conversation. And that would be a baby born really early, where we want that milk to be the highest fat it can be. So sometimes babies in NICU will pump off that first early milk and give the baby the higher calorie hind milk. The other situation I've seen it is if a woman has a really, really large milk supply, and the baby gulps for like 4 minutes and they're done. And those babies though are gassy. They gain really quickly, but they're not happy because they have usually tummy issues. So if your baby's content having yellow poops and is gaining appropriately, don't worry about it. Your baby's getting the fat and the milk and everything's good. So we don't want to make it too technical and confusing.
Yeah, it can be really stressful as well, because we think about how many mils is our baby getting as well. When we, if you're a mum who pumps, we go through so many different questions as new mums, trying to figure out how many mils should baby be getting on a day, because we sort of, I guess there's that language that's spoken. If your baby's having X mils a day, that's a good thing, or this is the average. So then it becomes this scary thing for us to try and figure out, okay, so how do I know my baby's getting X mils. So if I pump, then I can calculate, because then I've got a marker, which also can make it quite nerve-wracking or
And a lot of
stressful.
work. It's double the work because you're pumping and then you still have to give the milk. So I
Yeah.
know I've had women that say, I just want to like 1 ounce, 2 ounces line on my breast that tells me exactly how much the baby get, or I want to on the baby, right? But that's where the education is important as far as wet and dirty, like what goes in has to come out. So if your baby's peeing and pooping and gaining, they're getting enough. And the thing is, babies don't have the same amount of breast milk every feeding. So even if it was 32 mils that they had one time, it might be 56 the next. So those numbers, try not to worry too much. I tell moms, like, it's all about what's going on in 24 hours. Is your baby getting enough? Are they telling you they're happy? Are they little limp noodles after they feed? Or are they still, crying and chewing on their hands and wanting more milk? So it's looking at the baby, the behavior of the baby, the weight, the pees, the poops, all of that, rather than the time at the breast. Or there's no way of knowing the volume of milk per feed at the breast. And we don't need to if we trust that our babies will tell us if they need more,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
On that as well, another thing that comes up quite often is, how do I know if I'm full or not full once you've had a feed? And your because your breasts change over the day as well.
Yeah. And your body, the thing is with that is the breast is never theoretically empty. There is storage capacity to the breast. So at times, if the baby goes longer at night, your breast might feel more full and heavy and where the skin's almost tight sometimes because it's so full. But for the most part, your body will make milk while the baby feeds too. So you can have a breast that feels pretty soft and you think, oh my gosh, like I don't even know if I
I'm
should
empty.
offer
I
this
don't have enough milk. Am I giving my baby enough?
Yeah, but if you put the baby on, listen for those swallows, chances are within a few minutes your baby will start like swallowing and getting milk, and that's because your body's making milk too. So yeah,
Yeah.
in the early days, it's easier to tell because the breasts are kind of overfull from swelling. So it's like, oh, it's full, it's time to feed. But as an older baby feeds, the breasts don't necessarily tell you. You just put the baby on and listen for swallows, basically.
From your community and your experience, what are probably some of the key questions that have kind of come up? I mean, I suppose we covered in that a fair bit, but is there anything that what we've spoken about that brings to mind in terms of what you generally get asked, or what's the key concerns?
I think concerns about milk supply is a huge one. I get that asked a lot. Do I have enough milk? Is my baby getting enough? Those are huge questions where we have to provide a lot of reassurance and teaching and support. And sometimes babies do need extra milk, and we want to feed them when they need extra milk, of course, right? But that's where knowing what to watch for to know if your babies are getting enough milk is important or not. So I think probably sore nipples and milk supply are the two things that I, I deal with a lot as far as just working on the latch and getting the milk supply going. Those would be the main things, especially in the early weeks of breastfeeding.
Yeah. And now going back to the latch, you mentioned, I guess this is also kind of pain related, and understanding how deep is the latch or how shallow is the latch, depending on what you're feeling and not necessarily knowing. And even if you're, going back in for second or third time baby, you might have a better feeling for what you should be looking out for. But would you recommend to mums, to kind of, for them to coach themselves on getting, information, etc., around what sort of positions and how to feed baby, and what are there any positions that you recommend? Does that influence the latch, or?
It's good to learn a few different positions because there's certain, like sometimes the babies just aren't comfortable lying one way, or so it's nice to have an option of the other way. In addition, I've seen women with large breasts and short arms. So having the baby in the football, it just doesn't work for them. So I think it's good to learn a few different ideas of ways that babies can breastfeed in different positions so that you have an option to experiment and kind of see what works for you. Some moms really like the lying back where the baby's like right on top of them. It's so relaxing because they can drop their shoulders back and watch Netflix and it's comfortable. So there's not one position that's better than the other. If the baby's comfortable and the mom's comfortable and the baby's able to get milk, then that's the position, the best one for you. But I have had moms that have spent the whole time breastfeeding, like sitting upright, and all these neck and shoulder muscles get so sore. And so trying something else, maybe side lying in bed or laid back, it makes a world of difference just for how they feel. So Yeah. So it's good to learn a variety, but you don't have to switch it up. If it's working for you, then that's the position that works. And you can throw in a different one here or there if you want to, but there's not a lot of rules around that.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Um, I think most of the questions that we've spoken about prior to this interview and kind of gone back in terms of that, I feel like we've probably covered off most of them, and it's been such a nice fluid conversation. One of the things that you've mentioned a few resources here and there, but where would you um, suggest, yeah, mums go for more information? You've got the great courses available, and I totally recommend mums, um, if they're wanting to like jump into really learning more about breastfeeding and the details that we've spoken about, then your courses are a great place to start. And it's amazing for you being on our fourth trimester panel as well. You've answered such incredible questions as well, where we drill a little bit more into the questions that we've spoken about right now in this interview. And we've gone down into a bit more detail within that as well, which has been really helpful. If a mum is just wanting to Google, I guess,
Yeah,
to probably point her in the best direction, and so it's not just out on Dr. Google, you mentioned.
yeah, I would find like 3 or 4 websites that you really like, and I still Google, but I Google like topic
Knowing
and
where
then
to Google, I think, is the best thing, and coming through from a recommendation from a professional.
yeah, I really like Kelly Mom's website, for example, kellymum.com. She's a lactation consultant and a mom. So I might Google like baby weaning, but then I'd throw in Kelly Mom so that at least her article comes out first and I know it's a trusted resource. Because if you just do weaning, you'd probably get a million results and you don't even know what to trust, right? So I like kellymum.com. I would say La Leche League International is good. We do breastfeeding online, which is Dr. Jack Newman's information from Toronto. And then our website, of course, I like too, but we don't have, like, we have a blog, but even with what we have on ours, I'm always Googling other people's too. So I think it's good to have a handful so that you can go there first, find out what you need. And then if you have to do a random Google, it's because you didn't find it where you were looking in the first with the other 3 or 4 that you had in mind. So
yeah, no, for sure. But thank you so much, so much for all of your time. You've just provided so many great insights. And if there are any mums who are watching this and who have any further questions for Jana that we haven't been able to answer, please flick them through, and we'll get back to you in time as well. I've just jumped back onto the page, and Chelsea has said she loves working with Jana. She's an amazing nurse and lactation consultant, and she looks up to you as a mentor.
Oh, well, thank you, Chelsea.
That's beautiful. And Helena said, thank you. You know, this is really something useful. So, and she's a mum with 2 kiddies herself as well. So you can never have too much information. You can never not learn something new. I've definitely discovered, you know, having 2 kids myself, both breastfeeding experiences were so different. And because both children are so different. So yeah, just whether you're going into this for your first time, whether you're an experienced mum, I think you can always learn something new. And there's all these handy tips that you always can get from, you know, going to the right places, the resources that you trust, the professionals that you trust, and talking to that community of mums, because experienced mums or mums who've been there, everyone, I always feel like, has a different tip. And I love that you did that survey with your mums, just in terms of what do they find is like a necessity, what's a definitely put this in your postpartum kit, versus kind of the nice to haves, because everybody's financial budgets are different as well in terms of what's important to you as well. I'm glad that you've, you know, stopped, altered that premise of women thinking that, you know, rub your nipples and you can prepare for.
There's a lot of we call them breastfeeding myths, and they're things that have gone through generations that sometimes aren't necessarily based on research. So that's it. I mean, everything is constantly changing. We're gathering so much more insight from a scientific point of view now as well.
And it's great to be able to lean on you guys as lactation consultants who literally drill down into studying all the science behind breastfeeding. And the hormonal level is something as well that we've discussed as well, Jana, just in terms of like how prolactin comes in and the differences between, you know, oxytocin and prolactin, etc., that we kind of go down into a bit as well, that we haven't been able to cover off here as well, because that as well is a whole nother topic. And like you said, you've done a whole hour, whole Facebook on just expressing. You could just go into so much detail about each area.
Talk about breastfeeding for days, like, and we do conferences for like 5 days long, and you get deeper knowledge, but it's just being able to pass it on to families, what's new, you know, we certainly don't expect families to learn it at that deep of a level, but it helps us to problem solve. When there are problems, we can kind of lead them in the right direction and give them some tips and guidance based on that education and research.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think just what you were talking about as well, just in terms of whatever you discover in terms of your feeding experience, the key thing is just to be comfortable with what you're doing and that baby's thriving. And provided that you're in a good position and you're feeling good about your journey and your baby is doing really well, then forget all the external pressures and forget trying to, I guess, make everything super technical and complicated. Like you mentioned, you know, trying to figure out how many mils and have you given baby enough, and if you've ever gotten any questions, just to seek help early and to know that lactation consultants exist out there, that you can speak to your maternity care provider to get the help you need.
Yeah, sometimes you just need reassurance too to build your confidence in those early days too. So that's a role we play too, is just, you know, reassuring that things are okay. But yeah, so there's many roles, but you know, it was just so nice to be here though. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah.
No, so, it's been amazing. I'm so honored to have you on our fourth trimester panel, and have been very honored to have you give up your time this evening, because I think, what's the time there right now? So it's just going 10 to 12 here.
Almost 6.
Yep. So you're about to head off for dinner, and we're heading off for lunch.
For me though, it's Monday. Right?
Yes. Yeah. And it's Tuesday here for us, so we're quite a bit behind, but you've given up your time to be here with us, so thank you so much. And you do incredible work helping women, and yep, if you've got any further resources that you'd like to share, I'll add them into the group and the Facebook page as well. So thank you so much for your time, Jana.
Great. Take care.
Thank you. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.